Father, we lift up all these prayers to you. And tonight I pray that as we go through this text, that we would set aside all distractions, that we would come to understand the text as you'd have us understand it. Not reading into it what we want it to say, but that we would take it at your word. And Father, I pray that we would allow your word to shape us in meaningful ways that allow us to live holier lives. And even when we can't see the fruits and we can't see where it goes, that we would still be faithful to you. And you tell us that the righteous live by faith. I pray that we would be those who live by faith and who abide in your word. And Father, I pray that you would just receive the glory, and in your name I pray. Amen. All right. So I wasn't here last week. I watched most of last week's video, and it was a really good discussion. Honestly, I think it's kind of probably good that you led last week because you were a lot more familiar with the Old Testament, and so I think that actually was, who knows, maybe God was behind that. And I wish I was. I would be honest. I wish I was a little more prepared for tonight too. But I think we'll be good. But before we jump in, we went through verses 10 through 16 last week. Hopefully we'll go to the end of chapter 1 tonight. Just to recap a little bit, we're going through 1 Peter, so this is an epistle written by the Apostle Peter to what we believe to be most likely scattered diaspora of Jewish believers throughout the region of modern-day Turkey. And if I had to summarize what we've read so far, if not even the entire letter, as broadly as possible, I would almost say that it is we look forward to a future hope that allows us to endure the present. And I should say, we look forward to a future hope that is rooted in a past through what God's done and foretold, and that allows us to endure present hardships. And so the first week we talked a lot about this future hope, right? We talked about how Peter was thanking God because we are born again into a living hope, and this is one that is we have the resurrection, in which when Jesus returns we will receive new bodies, and this is something that, and we can rejoice in the days, we don't know what day it'll be, but we still rejoice in that day. And he says that allows us to actually endure suffering, because not only is suffering something that is inevitable, but it's actually necessary and something to be embraced, because it strengthens our faith and helps us live faithfully. And then last week, in order to really emphasize the future, you kind of have to go back to the past, right? And so that's what Peter does. He talks about how we have this future salvation of our souls that is guaranteed through our faith. And of course, he's talking to Jewish believers, so what does he do? He goes back to what they know, right? The Old Testament. And so, this isn't a new faith. This is a faith that has been, already been proclaimed through the prophets of the Old Testament, right? And we also learned that even though they didn't know when that would be, these prophets, they lived by faith. They faithfully served, and they taught to a people that didn't hear, but in doing so, they actually were serving us. And so, we pray that we are the people who are hearing, and we have, because we have placed our faith in Christ. But that pretty much leads us into what we're going through this week, because ultimately, after we examine the future that is rooted in the past, what that calls us to do is to be holy, and that's what God's called us to do ever since the beginning. And so I'm just going to read last week's slides. and then we'll jump in. Sound good?
Yep.
Okay. Concerning this salvation, the prophets who prophesied of the grace that would come to you made careful searches and inquiries, inquiring to know what time or what kind of time the Spirit of Christ within them was indicating, as he was predicting the sufferings of Christ and the glories to follow. It was revealed to them that they were not serving themselves, but you, and these things which now have been declared to you through those who proclaim the gospel to you by the Holy Spirit sent from heaven, things into which angels long to look. Therefore, having girded your minds for action, being sober in spirit, fix your hope completely on the grace to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ, as obedient children, not being conformed to the former lusts which were yours in your ignorance, but like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves also in all your conduct, because it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. One thing I'll also add here, so like I said, here Peter talks about how the gospel that, ensures the salvation of our souls it's rooted in the Old Testament, right? And then here we kind of get a little bit of a transition. We get some language. Peter starts introducing some language that gives the imagery of children. And we're going to get more of that later on, but I just wanted to add that I think I said this the first week, but a lot of this book is about suffering and trials, and that can come in different forms. And this can come in the form of being persecuted for being a Christian, which is, especially back then, that's what a lot of people had to go through. In our culture, we don't really have to deal with that right now, but and this can also go. There's also the trial of sanctification, I might say, like the actively having to turn away from your own sins and eat every single day. That in and of itself is a sort of trial, right? And then I'd say like a third way, and they're all tied together, right? There's not like three categories in the Bible, but they all overlap. But a third way that we kind of suffer righteously is God's discipline. And it's something that we don't talk about a lot, but it is something that the Bible doesn't shy away from, is that those who have a relationship with God and they call him his father, you call them your father, those are the people who accept and embrace his discipline. People like King David, who said that his rod and his staff comforts him in the valley of the shadow of death. The imagery is that God's wisdom and discipline actually comforts him. It doesn't scare him. I just wanted to put that in there because I think that will come into play as we go through the next verses. Does that make sense? Okay. So, again, he's comparing us to children because, God is our Father. As obedient children, not being conformed to the former lust which were yours in your ignorance, but like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves and also in all your conduct, because it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy.
And if I can add one thing real quick. No, you can still say it on the next slide, it's fine.
Okay.
But there's just something, as you were describing that, it made me make a connection that we didn't talk about last week, but we kind of hinted at other stuff that ties to it. So last week we talked about the centrality of our future hope and basically sobering our minds up to live in the present, right? Mm-hmm. Which is really what all these verses so far have been about. And then another thing we talked about is how both Jesus and the prophets in many ways are being cited as examples of what we're supposed to do, right? But the main thing we emphasize in regards to how they're examples is the fact that these are guys who suffered, right? But if you actually think about it, the reason why they suffered was for a future hope, right? If you think about it, so in the book of Hebrews, it says Jesus, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, right? And he just, Peter just referenced how Jesus suffered before glory, right? So it's not simply that he suffered, but he suffered because of this future hope, right? And whenever you see Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, he's terrified of what is presently facing him. But the reason he endures it with joy is because of the future hope. Same thing with the prophets, right? The thing that Peter highlights is that these guys were writing despite the fact that they knew that their present audience would not believe. Right? So they're in the present, they chose to suffer because they had this future hope that one day their words would be heard. Right? And so all of the examples being cited here are all about present suffering in light of future hope, which then ties to the whole holiness thing. Right? Because I think the whole point is that whenever you keep your eyes on the end goal and the future hope, it sobers your mind up. Right? Usually the reason why people will go get drunk at a party is because they're so focused on the moment that they're not actually thinking about the long-term ramifications of this, right? So they become drunken, right? The way that you choose to stay sober is by keeping in mind long-term things, right? And so if you're going to live in the present, you have to keep in mind the long-term, right? And so that's what Jesus did. And so not only did he suffer, but he lived a holy lifestyle, even when everybody around him was not living that way, right? Even the scribes and Pharisees, who were the righteous of the righteous, in comparison to him, they were nothing, right? That's why he says anybody who wants to enter his kingdom, they must have a righteousness that surpasses the scribes and the Pharisees, right? Same thing with the prophets, right? The prophets were willing to suffer, and that was because their minds were sobered up, right? And so they were living holy lives, right? So the holiness and the suffering kind of go hand in hand, and both of them are only achieved by keeping in mind the future goal, right? The idea is that if you're living in the present, you have to keep your mind on the future, or else you're going to be no good to like actually serve God in the present, if that makes sense, right? So that was just like another thing where it's like we addressed kind of all those things. I was just wanting to address how like it's all unified around that central like the future hope aspect of things. And something about what you were saying just reminded me of that. So
Yeah, you're good. Another thing to add to it, I guess. But I think it was the very first week we talked about it, but where Peter says like, though you do not see him, you love him, and though you do not see him now, you believe in him. The same thing there. Another common thing with like the prophets and with just those who like live righteously. They oftentimes, they're not really seeing like we look forward to a future that we're confident in it, but we don't technically see it. And so we're still having to live in the moment righteously and holy for something that we don't physically see like in front of us. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, it kind of ties to the whole in the world, not of it mentality, right? We live in the world, in the present, realizing that this world is not our home, right? We are living for this future kingdom that we will one day dwell in forever. But we're living in the present. Right, so it's literally in the world, not of it. Right, it's like the world that we are of is in the distant future. Well, could be distant future. We don't know how far away it is. Right, the way that the Bible describes it is the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Well, what does that hand mean? Right, does it mean it's here, or does it mean it's coming? Right, it could be either one. Right, and so I think it kind of ties into that whole mentality of present, future.
Right. And like, I guess, like what I was also trying to say is like, especially when you're surrounded by people that either aren't Christians or that like, how do I say this? I'm trying to explain what I'm thinking. Like, it can be easy to think like, what's the big deal? Like, as long as I'm just looking like everybody else, like you don't, like, I guess I almost think of like a quote from The Chosen where I forget who it says like, I don't feel different. He says, I just need you to be different.
Oh yeah, it's Philip, isn't it? I don't remember like who it is, but yeah, like I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, just like sometimes like living faithfully, it may not feel like you may not feel like it's making a difference, or that you may not feel like the. It's when he's appointing the apostles. It's that scene. I think it's Nathaniel. Where they say like cause he says you have this power, and they say I don't feel any different. He's like, yeah, you don't need to feel. I don't want you to feel. It's just you are, right? It's something along those lines. I don't remember. But keep I guess my point is keeping your mind fixated on something that we know we can trust. Yeah, helps keep us sober in the present, because it can be easy to think like, well, it's not a big deal. Like, you know, in like day-to-day decisions, you can slack off and
indulge in whatever.
You're not living based off of your feelings. You're living based off of your convictions.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like you're, it's not following your heart. It's following your God.
The world is obsessed with that, though. I mean, they'll say follow your heart, when in actuality, when you follow your heart, you actually get in more trouble than if you just trust God.
Actually, don't follow your heart. Follow your hope. There you go.
Amen.
There you go. Now it alliterates.
That's it. Hopefully, what I was trying to say made sense.
Yes, no, it does.
Okay. Anyways, we can jump into the actual text for tonight, but I'll go ahead and read through. And if you address as Father the one who impartially judges according to each one's work, conduct yourselves in fear during the time of your sojourn, knowing that you were not redeemed with corruptible things like silver or gold from your futile conduct inherited from your forefathers, but with precious blood, as of a lamb unblemished and spotless, the blood of Christ. He was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but appeared in these last times for the sake of you, who through him are believers in God, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God. Any thoughts there?
Many.
I love it when it talks about his precious blood being unblemished like a lamb and spotless.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Precious blood of Jesus.
I'll have to break that one down because if you're not familiar with the Bible, that's some weird language.
Right.
Precious blood. Sounds like vampire stuff. That was the precious blood. Whoa.
Right. Okay. I want to go verse by verse.
Alright.
And if you address as Father the one who impartially judges according to each one's work, conduct yourselves in fear during the time of your sojourn. We can just stop it there. So what's he saying there? There's a conditional statement in there.
And if you address as Father the one who impartially judges.
So what's the command, I should say? We'll start there. What's the command?
Conduct yourselves in fear.
Conduct yourselves in fear. And then what's the condition?
If you address as Father the one who impartially judges.
Mm-hmm. So I guess who addresses as Father? The one who impartially judges.
Thinking that could be God the Father, or it could be Jesus.
Wait, are you asking who's doing the addressing?
Yeah, I guess I should say who is he referring? Like who's he addressing?
So who is you? Is that what you're asking? Okay. What would be his audience?
Mm-hmm.
First off, so whoever the audience of the book is,
Yeah.
which goes back to the original question that we've been wrestling through every week. And I'm just going to throw my 2 cents out here. I think that these verses, once again, would reinforce the fact that this is probably a Jewish Christian audience, which, once again, I feel like I harp on this a lot. It's not because I have some secret agenda of, like, saying that, like, it doesn't apply to us. It does apply to us. That's why we're going through this.
Yeah.
The main reason I keep harping on it is because, to me, every single part of this letter seems to suggest that it's Jewish, right? So all because it is a Jewish audience doesn't change that much. To me, it just changes how you interpret some things, right? Like there's just certain assumptions that Jewish people would already understand, where we have to, like, as Gentiles, we have to do a little bit more like legwork. But certain language he uses here would suggest it's a Jewish audience to me. But.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, if Jewish audience didn't apply, then we just go throughout the whole Testament. Yeah.
And so I just feel weird because, like, I mean, y'all know this in this room. I'm more like talking about, like, people who are watching online. They're like, why does this guy keep bringing this up? I think the reason I keep bringing it up is because so often when I read people interpreting 1 Peter, they miss the audience, right? And I think it's me just like kind of being like, oh, look, the language seems suggestive, but we'll probably get into that. But at the very least, it's his audience that he's talking to, right? And if you address as Father, right? So he's saying something about their relationship with God.
Yeah. To me, it seems like, I mean, it's kind of like an implied, like, or it's almost like a rhetorical, not statement, but like I think the implication is that, you know, the audience already does address this Father, the one who impartially judges. So the implication is that to his audience, like, what is he asking them to do? Which I guess I already asked that, but like, what's the command?
Live in fear while you're on this world.
Mm.
Love God.
And so, what is it?
Sorry, what were you saying?
Oh, you,
I think ultimately what he's doing is he's calling them to be consistent, right? Because he's saying, okay, if on one hand you are willing to call God, right? So, like, he's saying if you address as Father the one who impartially judges, well, the question is, well, who is the one who impartially judges? Well, that's God, right? And so he's saying if you address as Father God, right? So if you are willing to call God Father, right? Abba. If you're willing to call him Father, then you better conduct yourself in fear. Right? So it's saying if you are identifying yourself as a son of God, well, then you better walk as a son who is obedient to their father. Right? Because the thing is, you are choosing, right? It's like it's a choice. Everybody's made an image bearer of God, but a son of God, it's adoption. So if you are willing to call him Father, well, then treat him like a father, right? And you conduct yourself in fear, right?
So,
don't just call him Father and then not do that. I think that's kind of what he's getting at.
is it John 7 or 8 where the Pharisees are saying like Abraham is our father? And Jesus basically just says like, well, Abraham was your father, you do the things that Abraham did.
I think it's John 8. Because like the whole idea of God being Father comes up a lot in John. Specifically because earlier on Jesus calls it Father, and that's like specifically how he says it. They realize that he's making himself equal with God.
Yeah.
Right? Because he says, my Father, whereas usually we would say our Father. Right? Like when we say the Lord's Prayer, it's our Father who art in heaven, not my Father. Right? It's like we say as a community, God is our Father, but Jesus says he is my Father. And so like with that one, they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. So the Father thing comes up a lot. I think it's John 8, but I will look that up while you...
Okay. But yeah, but that is a good point though, because I mean he is pointing out like if you're going to call God your Father, then you have to live like a son of God.
One question that I have for y'all while I'm going through this. So one thing he says, like the way that he identifies God is he does not just say God. He says the one who impartially judges according to each one's work. Why? Like, I mean, there's many ways you can describe God, right? Nowadays, you would probably expect it to say, and if you address as Father, the one who loves everybody unconditionally, right? Like, that's usually how we would say it. Why do you think that is the way that, like, contextually, why do you think it is, I don't even have an answer for this, why do you think it is that Peter chooses to highlight that specific quality of God? The one who impartially judges according to each one's work.
I would say because one day when we all die, we're going to be in front of God and he's going to judge us. Not a lot of people think that, oh, I'm going to hell. Why am I going to hell? Technically, you send yourself to hell. But, how that works, but
yeah,
he's going to judge you according to what you did. You got to be ready to,
I wonder if part of the answer there actually lies in what we've been talking about with the audience too, like why he would feel the need to say this specifically to a if it's a primarily Jewish audience. I don't know if y'all get what I'm going for, but it's kind of actually related to like the John passage, but
I think the Father part makes sense to me there. You might have to explain a little bit more if you're talking about the impartially judges thing.
I guess what I'm thinking of is like Jewish people thinking they have some sort of like partiality.
Okay.
Because of their like blood.
Yeah.
Which would again make sense if he's talking to primarily Jewish people.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what he's going for, but
yeah. I like, in regards to the father thing, I think that is a
Mhm.
language, like, if he's speaking to a Gentile audience, naturally, that's not language that they would normally use to refer to God as much. Like, that's something they would pick up from Jewish people. Like, the reason we call God Father nowadays is because, first off, we have Trinitarian theology, right? Father, Son, and Spirit.
Yeah.
And because the Bible has become so, culturally significant. But in general, only, like, you would never catch, like, a Greek person referring to, like, any of the Greek gods as Father, right? Unless it was, like, in a, not in, like, an intimate way. It would be more like, like, Father Zeus, but not like our Father Zeus, right? And so, him saying, if you address as Father, right? To me, that would suggest that he is talking to people who are more Jewish in nature, like, God is the father of their nation. They are his children, right? Yeah.
Another way to put it, because this is the Jewish audience. Maybe whenever Peter was writing this, he was like think about the Old Testament. Like when things aren't going well, God's judging you to correct yourself. So maybe he wrote this particularly for, you said in Turkey, or people in Turkey, or
Like modern day Turkey, yeah.
modern day Turkey. Maybe they were doing something wrong, and God's telling them during that time that God's going to judge you according to what you do. So live in fear during your time on earth. He's like hinting, like, oh, maybe you're doing something wrong. Maybe you need to repent, or
And Sean, going back to what you were saying, I am kind of picking up what you're saying about the partiality thing. Because if you go back to the previous verses, what it says is, as obedient children, do not be conformed to the former lusts which were yours in your ignorance, but like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves also in your behavior, because it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. Right? And so his whole thing was, he was saying, if you're obedient children, you need to live as obedient children, for the Holy One called you to be holy. Right? And so I think that there could be this implied idea that, sometimes kids think, oh, well, if I'm the kid, I'm going to receive favoritism. Right? Oh, well, since if this is a Jewish audience, right? Since I am Jewish, and I've received the law, well, then I get special treatment from God. Right? And so, I'm his child, so maybe I don't have to fully obey things, right? The Gentiles are the ones who deserve the judgment, because they're not the ones who received the law. And they didn't receive all those things. Whereas for me, I'm already a child of God. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. Like, that's what they're singing, right? That's their mentality. And it could be that Peter is countering that, right? And so he doesn't say, if you address as Father God, he says, let me remind you who God is. God is the one who impartially judges everyone according to their work.
There is no Jew nor Greek.
Yeah, there's neither Jew nor Greek. So it's the same thing that Paul highlights in his gospel, in his letters, right? So it could be that that's what Peter's getting at, right? If you're willing to call God your Father, then the person you are calling Father is not a father who shows favoritism. It is a father who treats everybody equally. And therefore, if you're his child, he is not going to be more lenient with you. He's going to be stricter with you, right? It could be that that's what he's getting at there, right? So it's actually, he's emphasizing the strictness of God, which would make sense because then it says conduct yourselves in fear, right? And so it could be like he's like smacking them in the face, being like, remember, like God is not like a human parent who might coddle their child and be harsh on other people, right? No. God is a good parent who expects more of their children, right? And they'll be more gracious to other kids because they realize, those kids aren't going to follow my standards, right? And so it could be that he's highlighting that, which to me would make a lot of sense. And I think that's kind of what you were getting at.
Yeah. That's what I was getting at.
Also, I did find it's in John chapter 8. It seems relevant to this, to where Jesus was saying in verse 38, I speak the things which I have seen with my Father. Therefore you also do the things which you heard from your father. And then the Jews answered and said to him, Abraham is our father. And Jesus said to them, if you are Abraham's children, do the deeds of Abraham. But as it is, you're seeking to kill me, a man who has told you the truth, which I heard from God. This Abraham did not do. You are doing the deeds of your father. Then they said to him, we were not born of fornication, We have one Father. They're like making fun of Jesus because of his sketchy past, right? Because he was born at questionable circumstances. Jesus said to them, if God were your Father, you would love me. For I proceeded forth and have come from God. For I have not even come of my own initiative, but he sent me. Why do you not understand what I'm saying? It is because you cannot hear my word. You are of your father the devil, and you want to do the deeds of your desires of your father. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because the truth is not in him. Right? And so that does kind of tie together the idea of the children, like the son should be like the father. Right? So children will be like their father. The Jews were saying Abraham's our father, and he says, no. Because Abraham worshiped God. He says, you're like the devil, right? The devil is your father, right? And so Peter's kind of getting at that same idea, right? If you're willing to call the impartial judge father, well, then you need to be impartial, and you need to check yourself before you wreck yourself, right? You need to make sure that you are not casting judgment on other people, when really you need to be casting judgment on yourself, and you need to be holding yourself to a higher standard, right? You can't just be pointing fingers and say, all of y'all need to live holy lifestyles. No. Those people, they don't call God Father. You call God Father. Therefore, you need to live a holy life. You call God Father. Therefore, you need to conduct yourself in fear. Right? And so it could be that, like, he's kind of getting across the idea that, if he's your father, live like your father does. Seems like I'll stop talking now.
It also reminds me of when the Pharisees were like, doing outward actions of like godliness, but inside they were wicked, they were full of dead men's bones, and I think Jesus was also getting onto them for that.
Yeah, no, like the being externally. Yeah. No, for sure. I think another thing that goes along with this too, I don't know if this is his main point, but one thing that also goes with the imagery of father and son is the discipline. And I think it's also hypocritical to like I think he might also be addressing like the hypocrisy of claiming God as your father but rejecting his discipline. And the Bible does speak on that. Hebrews, it says that if you resist his discipline, then you're basically like a bastard son. And you have forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. And this is from Proverbs. Actually, I'll just go to Proverbs. My son, do not reject the discipline of Yahweh, or loathe his reproof. For whom Yahweh loves, he reproves, even as a father reproves the son in whom he delights. How blessed is the man who finds wisdom, and the man who obtains discernment. For her profit is better than the profit of silver, and her produce better than fine gold. She is more precious than pearls, and nothing you desire compares with her. Length of days is in her right hand, and her left hand are riches and glory. Her ways are pleasant ways, and all her pathways are peace. She is a tree of life to those who seize her, and all those who hold her fast are blessed. So it's the same idea there that if you address as father the one who impartially judges, then it's also going to follow that he's going to discipline you. But when you resist that, you're essentially not. You're kind of not claiming him as your father. When it's like selective. Like you're saying that you don't want him to be your father whenever he's calling you to suffer, but then also externally you want people like it's about image,
Yeah. Well, and the imagery of fatherhood, I guess. Like a good father wants their child to be as best they can possibly be. Right, so even if it goes beyond just discipline, like punishment, there could be I guess this still falls into the category of discipline. There could be discipline because you've transgressed, but there also could be discipline in the sense of just strengthening you, right? Like I know, like my dad, he wanted me to be the best athlete I could be, and so he would literally come up with these crazy workouts to have me go do. And honestly, I would get so frustrated at times because he couldn't do the workouts, right? But I'd be like, Dad, I don't want to do this. But the thing is, eventually I would do it because I knew he wasn't doing it because he was a cruel father. He was doing it because he was a good father. And he was wanting me to do this workout because he knew that in the long run it would make me better. Right? And I think it could kind of tie into that imagery here. Yeah. Where it's, yes, God is appointing us, like especially because he's going to highlight conduct yourselves in fear during the time of your sojourn, right? During this key time, right? It's not forever, right? But there's this key moment of like discipline or hardship that you're going to have to face, and that also comes part and parcel with being his son, right? Because sometimes people want to be the son of God because they, it's like, being adopted into a rich family, right? Oh yes, now I get to have a yacht and a mansion and fancy cars. Okay, but that's not all it is, right? But that's usually why we want to be sons of God, right? Because we want the streets flowing with gold, and we want heaven, and we want love, and all that stuff. But the thing is, if we want to be sons of God, we have to allow him to be the father he's going to be. And if he wants to appoint us to go through hardship, if we want to be part of the family, that's part of it, right? And so, but basically it's saying you can't just pick and choose what you want from God. If you're in the family, you've got to let the head of the household do what he's going to do. Whereas a lot of Christians, they don't like that, right? Like they just want the good stuff from God, right? They're in it for the easy stuff, but they don't want to also go through hard things. But he's like, no, that's not how this works, right? A father can discipline you, but he can also give you great gifts, right? And if he's the father, he is the one who decides when those come. As the kid, you don't have to say in that, right? And so,
it's like James says, every good thing is from God above.
Yeah. James is like encouraging people. Every good gift is from God above. And then Peter's over here like, yeah, the bad stuff can come from him too. But he's arguing that the bad stuff is a good thing, right? We just don't always view it as a good thing, which ultimately James is saying too, because James is saying it in the context of suffering.
Right.
Right. Ironically, the apostles just viewed suffering as a gift. Opening up a Christmas present. What did I get? Ooh, suffering! Yay! It's like, thank you, Dad. I love it. I love this whip. Who's it for? You. Oh.
Uh-oh.
Okay.
So that makes me think that as humans, we don't really like going through suffering, but if we know God has it for us and it's good, we should be willing to do it, even though our flesh doesn't like it.
Yeah. I mean, that is a type of discipline too. I mean, Paul talks about like disciplining his body, and that's self-control and purity. That's important.
Well, that's something I've gotten an opportunity to see with my coaching track. Right? It's been very interesting. I was actually talking with one of my runners about this yesterday. He's my best runner. Right? Yesterday he won all 3 races in district, which is really cool. But we were talking about this yesterday. We were laughing about it underneath the tent because at the beginning of the year he hated me. Like he legitimately, he annoyed me and no, he didn't annoy me. He was annoyed by me, right? And he would literally just be sending texts to people in the group chat, just bad mouthing me, stuff like that. I never said anything because ultimately he's a kid, right? And I was like, okay. But the thing is, he was annoyed because he thought I would be extra hard on him. But that's because I knew that I needed to be, and he would become a lot better. And what's been cool over the course of the year is that as he's gotten to know me more, he's gotten to understand my character more. And even whenever I'm being really hard on him, he understands that I'm not doing it out of anger, I'm doing it out of love. And he's become more he's become more responsive to it. To where it's been really cool just seeing his transformation over the course of the year. To where now we can literally laugh about how he used to get annoyed by me. Because he's and he literally said yesterday, I didn't even say it, he said, yeah, that was just pride. And he admitted, he was yeah, I was just proud, and I would get annoyed by you, but now, he's realized that I had an end goal here, and now he's out here winning all these races. And it's cool because now, he'll come in the morning, and he'll be what workout we got today? And I'll tell him it's a hard one. And he'll joke around and be oh, no, I'm not going to do that. But the thing is, I can see in his eyes, he's going to do it. And he knows it's going to be tough, but he's willing to go through it because he trusts that I'm not doing it just to harm him. I'm doing it because I've got an end goal. Right? And so, to me, that kind of falls in the same mentality. Over the course of the year, I've kind of seen that transformation. As he's gotten to know my character more, and as he's gotten to see that I am being impartial here. Right? At the beginning of the year, he thought I was just attacking him. Right? He thought I was just being a jerk, when really I just saw potential. And I was no, you could be better. You just need to show up to practice, right? And as he's realized that I'm being more impartial and that I'm genuinely trying to refine him, he's trusted me more to where he's willing to let me push him, and he's gotten a lot faster, right? And so, I don't know, like to me, it's kind of the same mentality. I'm not saying I'm God, but I think that it's kind of our job to like through life, like reflect on things like that and try to understand that. But I've seen that shift, and it's the same as what Peter's addressing here, right? It hinges on God's character, right? If God is impartial, and if God is a father that you can trust, then count it joy when you suffer, right? Get ready, like, to endure it, right? Don't flee suffering, because God appointed it for you. Why would you run away from a good workout whenever God wants you to get that workout in, right? It's kind of that mentality.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Anything else I wanted to add to that?
I'll add to what David said. Not all workouts are bad, though. I mean, workouts can strengthen you. That's what trials are meant for.
Alright. So, and if you address as Father the one who impartially judges according to each one's work, conduct yourselves in fear during the time of your sojourn. For the second half of that verse, what does it mean when it says conduct yourselves in fear? So we hadn't got to that yet.
Your actions should flow out of the fear you have of God.
Mm-hmm. What does it mean by fear, though? We talked about this before, but we'll visit it again. But
Fear means fear. Fear does not just mean respect. It means fear. I think what he's getting at is, once again, like, all because he's your dad doesn't mean that he's going to take it easy on you, right? And I don't want you, like, if anything, it means he's going to be harder on you than anybody else, right? If he is your father, you need to fear him, right? You don't have to fear another person's father as much, like, as you do your own, because you know what? That other person's father, they don't have the right to spank you. Your father, he does.
yeah.
Right? So you better fear your father, right? But if that other person's father spanks you, well, then he better fear your father too, because the father's probably going to come after him, right? And so the idea is, like, sometimes the temptation's like, oh, God's my father, it's fine. He'll be fine with me, we love talking about God's grace, but like Sean's been emphasizing, well, God is a God of discipline too. And he's a God that might ask hard things of you. Conduct yourself in fear, right? Especially if he impartially judges. Because that means that all because you're his son does not mean he is going to judge you differently on that day when we all stand before him, right? It doesn't mean he's going to be like, all right, well, you're his son, so, like, you're my son, so it's okay. I know you did that sin. No. He's going to say, you knew better, right? Those people over there, like, he's going to be more gracious with them because they did not know better. But you're part of the family. You know our rules. We read the same book. What's your excuse? Right? So he says, you need to conduct yourselves in fear. Because you have examples, right? The people who don't call God Father, I mean, maybe they've heard of God. Maybe they know stories of his reputation. But, go talk to the average non-Christian. Does it seem like they fear the Christian God? No. Right? Because Christians haven't given them a reason to. Right? Because Christians don't fear the Christian God anymore. Right? Nowadays, we see the word fear and we diminish it to respect. Right? And so we shouldn't be surprised when the rest of the world doesn't fear God either. Right? Because of us, the name of God is blasphemed amongst the Gentiles. Right? I mean, like, that's how it is. But no, it's like we should fear him. Right? Because, we should be terrified. Because he's going to be harsher with us than he is with them because we know the rule book. We see the examples, right? We see him smiting down Nadab and Abihu. We see him destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. Mm-hmm. We see what happened to Ananias and Sapphira. Right? We see those stories. Ananias and Sapphira, guess what? They were part of the church. Right? That's not Old Testament. That's New Testament. Right? And so we see what God can do. We should conduct ourselves in fear. I think ultimately that's what he's getting at. You should be trembling in your boots. Not to the point of like running away from him though. It's to the point of drawing near.
Yeah. It is a terrifying thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Yeah, no, exactly. Like, it's the kind of fear that makes you realize that rather than running away from him, you want him on your side. Anything else there? And then the last part of that verse. So during the time of your sojourn. What does he mean there?
We're just here for a little time on journey.
That's the question, isn't it?
Journey.
Right.
What is the meaning of sojourn here?
I guess part of that would also depend, especially on how you view the audience, because
I think there could be a dual meaning.
yeah, I would say in this context for sure. Especially with the imagery of like, suffering for a short while and then glory.
Yeah.
But what do y'all think?
From one side, if you're taking it from the perspective that it's to a Jewish audience, they're like sojourners in a land that's not theirs because they're like occupying a Gentile area, and it kind of is like a nod to like Old Testament, like whenever the people were in exile and they're sojourners and not in their own land. So I guess on one side it could be that perspective.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true.
And I think that would even be true whether you interpret it as Jewish or not, because no matter what, he does use the word dispersed
Yeah.
earlier on. Like, so he literally identifies his audience as scattered
Yeah.
and dispersed. And so, no matter what, I think there is that. Like, that's probably the most basic meaning, right? During the time of your sojourn, like, he's interpreting the sojourn itself as an act of suffering, which, if it's a Jewish audience, makes sense because it's part of the exile, right? They were being disciplined for what they did, which really goes back to the Old Testament, right? If it's just a general Christian audience, well, then they are being persecuted, right? But then there's also the broader definition of sojourn, which I think he is intentionally doing a play on words here because he's talking to people who are physically sojourning, but he's speaking of a broader sojourn, which is evident because he's been talking about living in light of the future hope that we have, right? So that future glory is when the sojourn actually ends. So even if the Jewish people returned to Israel, their physical sojourn has ended, but the eternal sojourn has not yet ended. So there is this still ongoing sojourn. And the idea is that I think he's really saying life itself on earth is the sojourn. And you need to conduct yourselves in fear during that time. It's not as if like, hey, as long as you get back to the land of Israel, you have no reason to fear. Well, no, because that's what got them kicked out of Israel in the first place. Right? And so, yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say something else there. I don't know if that would really be relevant, but I was just also the idea of like, as sojourners, they're not like in their land, but there is also like in that future promise, there is the idea that like ultimately their inheritance isn't necessarily that land, Jerusalem, but it's going to be like the future inheritance of like glorification in heaven.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that'd be relevant there or not.
Well, it makes sense. It lines up with what Paul talks about like the bodies being tents, right? Like our present body is a tent, but we're waiting for a house, right? We're going to move into a house one day. So we are currently sojourning in these mortal bodies, but the mortal will give way to immortality. And so I think that's not only does it make sense with what he's saying here, but it's consistent with other New Testament stuff.
Yeah. It's like in the wilderness. So, conduct yourselves in fear during the time of your sojourn, knowing that you were not redeemed with corruptible things like silver or gold from your futile conduct, inherited from your forefathers, but with precious blood, as of a lamb unblemished and spotless, the blood of Christ. So, what's it saying there?
He's saying the sacrifice for the exchange isn't something of earthly value, but of a higher price, which would be Christ. His blood is like eternal and covers more.
So there definitely is a contrast there, but we'll start like word by word at a time. So knowing that you were not redeemed. So what does he mean by redeemed there?
Redemption is to be paid in full. A debt you owe.
Because it is somewhat connected to the verses above it. So conduct yourselves in fear, knowing that you were not redeemed with corruptible things like silver or gold from your futile conduct.
So this knowledge is the thing that should cause them to conduct themselves in fear.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like this awareness that you read in verses 18 and 19 should motivate them to conduct themselves in fear before the Father.
Yeah, and I guess really if you add verse 16 up there, so it talks about being holy, and then it says, conduct yourselves in fear, knowing that because you've been bought with precious blood, and then the thing is you've been redeemed from the futile conduct. So there's the futile conduct contrasted with the holy conduct.
Honestly, to me, it just sounds like Peter was reading Leviticus before he started writing this letter.
Right.
What? All of, I mean, like, he said, you shall be holy as I am holy. Like, he just quoted that in verse 16.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of this language is like Leviticus stuff. Either that, or he was just reading the book of Hebrews. But I don't know. Either that, or Peter wrote Hebrews. Heck, I don't know.
There's a lot of parallel imagery and stuff.
Yeah. I just want to highlight who the book of Hebrews was written to. Hebrews.
But so at least in this verse, like, what is he saying by redeemed? Like, what are they being redeemed from?
Their old life, the futile life they used to live.
Mm-hmm. And they got redeemed with what?
Precious blood of Jesus, unblemished, the unblemished, spotless Lamb.
The future.
Or yeah, the blood. Yeah. So why would he be telling them this?
Well, if somebody's being redeemed, it implies, like, so the idea of redeemed is the same as being like liberated or ransomed.
Like bought.
Right. Yeah. Which implies that you were the possession. Like, so if you're using bought language, then you were the possession of something else and you had to be purchased. If you're using ransomed or liberated, then you were slave to something else. You had to be freed. Right. So the implication is that somehow we belong to something else, and that we were redeemed. Right. And apparently it was the Father who did it. Right. Because knowing that we were redeemed is the one who, like, knowing that we are redeemed is the thing that's going to cause us to conduct ourselves in fear before the Father. And so, ultimately, if you're just following the logic, the Father is the one who redeemed us, and He did it through the blood of His Son. But the question, I think, behind all of this would be, what were we redeemed from? Right? If you're wanting to truly, like, understand how any of this is important. Right?
Yeah.
Because apparently, whatever we were redeemed from is going to cause us to conduct ourselves in fear. Because I don't think he doesn't specifically say that, right? It seems to be an unstated thing, which means that what he said so far should already give us the answer.
What, you're saying that what we were redeemed from?
Well, yeah. So, like, he doesn't outright say, like, he doesn't say, knowing that you were not redeemed from yada 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 with uncorruptible things. So he just says you were not redeemed, right? So it implies that
it's not from your futile conduct.
I guess it does say that. Yeah, that's true.
Because the idea is that they've been, like, redeemed from the futile conduct into, like, holy conduct in a sense.
I didn't even see that part there, but it's interesting because ultimately I think you can even, like, if that phrase wasn't there, you could still get to that from the previous verses, because that's where I was ultimately heading. Like, it's ultimately tying back to what was stated in, like, the previous, like, paragraph. But yeah, it does say that. So what's meant by from the futile conduct, I guess?
Empty life, just living for yourself, and
what does futile mean?
What does futile mean?
I like to think it means empty.
Yeah, that's a part of it.
I think fertile, like young. That's how I think of it.
Yeah.
Fertile conduct.
Futility.
Useless, worthless, vain.
Well, useful.
It seems like this word is like the Greek equivalent of the word hevel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's mataios.
Remember Ecclesiastes? How it opens up?
Is that helpful?
Vanity.
Vanity.
Vanity of vanities. And what was ultimately Solomon's main point with, like, what was the vanity
That life is
or
meaningless.
vanities? Everything, but what made it vanity? If that's, I guess that's the way I'd ask that.
It had been divorced from God.
The
Is
purpose.
that what you're going for?
I guess I haven't been thinking of that wording, but like, I mean, yeah, like basically like pursuing things like apart from God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that, and it seems like that's kind of the same language he's using here, because, yeah, it's basically just like he says futile conduct, it could be vain or meaningless or empty manner of life,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah.
Synonym for that word futile could be vanity or vain.
Yeah, like vain.
Vain.
So knowing that you were not redeemed from your futile conduct inherited from your forefathers.
And who would the forefathers be?
Well, I guess that depends on who the audience is.
Right.
Yeah.
So if there was Jewish, would be descendants of the 12 tribes?
Yeah, well, yeah, so this to me, once again, would be language that suggests to me it's Jewish Christians he's writing to, because Gentiles, it seems, I mean,
I guess you could.
Yeah.
I guess you could use that term in a very broad sense, just like your ancestors. But
yeah. Yeah,
I
it
feel
could just be broadly speaking of the human race, or if you're speaking of just Christians, well, ultimately Christianity came from Judaism. But to me, the word forefather specifically, I looked up to see where it shows up elsewhere, but this is the only time this word ever shows up in the Bible.
oh, really?
Yeah, it's a lot. Patroparadotos. It's a very long word. But yeah, it is the only time it shows up. But to me, the forefathers is inherently like Jewish language,
Yeah.
right?
well,
It's the idea of the futile conduct inherited from the forefathers. I think what he's basically saying is go look in the Old Testament,
mhm.
right? Like if you want to know what he's talking about, look at how the Jewish people lived in the Old Testament. Guess what ended up happening? They were forced to sojourn, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, because especially, I mean, the Jewish people all collectively have, like, they can all look at, like, they can read forefather and they're all thinking of the same thing. If it was just Gentiles, or a bunch of Gentiles, I mean, they could all read different things out of forefather.
Yeah.
Thinking of great great grandpa, or this, my forefathers were from this place or this place. But
Yeah.
if you read in, if it's that they're Jewish people, then to me that also just it makes more sense.
Yeah. Yeah, Jewish audience, they would think line of Abraham, right? So anyone from Abraham through them would be their forefathers, right? And so he's saying that whatever they were redeemed from, it was some sort of empty way of living that they had received from, I would assume, the Jewish people, right? And I don't think what he's arguing is that the Jewish people inherently had a vain way of living, right, or empty way of living. Because I think that Peter himself would argue that they had the most meaningful way of living, because he just quoted Leviticus earlier, you shall be holy as I am holy. I think what he's saying is that the Jewish people failed to follow the example God gave them, right? In the Torah, he said, be holy as I am holy, but they failed to do it, right? And so I think, and it all ties back to the sojourn, right? This is why it's important for us to know the whole story of the Bible, right? Because if you read the end of the Old Testament, you see that after the time of Solomon, things just go downhill. And the people start living horribly, and God starts sending prophets, which we just talked about prophets in the previous paragraphs as well, right? So God starts sending prophets to get onto them, but the people did not listen, right? And that's because the prophets knew that they were going to be writing for a future generation, which would be the current generation, right? So if you're just following with the logic of what Peter's saying, it seems to be that he specifically has in mind the Jewish people who were not listening to the prophets, and who as a result were destroyed and sent off into exile, aka sojourn, right? Those people, I think, is what he's arguing, they had a futile way of living, right? A futile conduct, right? Because they might have gone through the motions of the law, and they might have externally presented themselves as followers of God, and they might have even called themselves Yahweh worshipers, but they missed the point in a lot of ways. They did not live holy as God is holy, right? And whenever they suffered, they missed the point, right? They thought that if they just offered enough sacrifices, they could be redeemed, right? They thought they could be ransomed and they could be fixed if only the Persian king would send them back home, and if only they could have enough silver and gold to build a new temple, they would be good to go. And then, even by the time you get to Jesus, if only they could have a Messiah who could overthrow the Romans, then they could be redeemed and the kingdom of God could be established. And I think what Peter's highlighting is that this is the mentality that these people inherited, right? It was a faulty mentality. It was people who were trying to produce the kingdom of heaven by means of the kingdom of earth, right? It's people who were, they were trying to produce the kingdom of heaven themselves when you cannot do that, right? They were trying to find other ways to redeem themselves or ransom themselves and stuff like that, and it can't happen. And so I think he's highlighting that there needed to be another form of redemption, right? Because they came back to the land does not mean their sojourn ended, right? And so it's very fitting that he's writing to people who aren't even living in the land, right? Guys, the sojourn's still going on, right? All because there's people, there's a temple there. It's not going to be there for long. It's about to be destroyed by the Romans, right? Depending on when this was written, right? And so the idea is that the sojourn is still ongoing because redemption is not simply purchased by physical means, right? All because you offer a sacrifice, that doesn't cut it. I mean, David made that clear in the Psalms, right? I would offer a sacrifice, but that's not enough. The sacrifice of God or a contrite heart, right? And that seems to be what Peter's ultimately getting at here. He's trying to get them back to the heart of things, right? That ties into the conduct yourselves in fear, right? Because that's what the generation at the end of the Old Testament failed to do, right? That's why the prophets are constantly telling them to fear the Lord, right? That's why Solomon said the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, right? Those people were not living in wisdom, right? They did not conduct themselves in fear. They simply tried to check off boxes. And by the time you get to Jesus, they're going around saying, Abraham is our father. And they think that because they're the children of God, they receive extra benefits. And Jesus just goes and says, you're making people twice the childs of hell as you are. Right? And so, I don't know, like if I were to guess, I would think Peter has in mind specifically the entire generation of forefathers from the end of Solomon's reign all the way through the present time period, right? Basically, the failed Jewish society who was not focusing on God. I think that's what he probably has in mind when he says feudal conduct inherited from your forefathers, if I had to guess. But then I guess you could even argue that it goes back to the time period of the Judges as well, or the wilderness, right? It's something that they've inherited from every generation.
So the thing I thought of as far as other scripture was Paul didn't write to Jews, but he still, in 1 Corinthians, he says, now I want to remind you, brethren, that, I forget the exact wording, but he basically says, they all were baptized unto Moses, and they had the same spiritual cloud and the same spiritual drink, and that rock, and the rock that sustained them was Christ. Nevertheless, God wasn't pleased with all of them. Yeah. And then he mentions things they did, they were baptized into Moses, they were sustained by Christ, but yet they grumbled against God, and some were destroyed. Some God rose them to play.
There's a play.
And so he's saying those things happened as like warnings to us. Like I said, he wrote to Gentiles there, obviously, but what he's calling back to could also be relevant for that.
Now these things happened as an example for us, so that we would not crave evil things as they also craved. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and stood up to play. Nor let us act immorally, as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in one day. Nor let us try the Lord, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the serpents. Nor grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. And it goes on. That's 1 Corinthians 10.
Yeah. That was what popped in my head, but I think both of them probably.
Yeah, I think there's just this general idea. I think probably what the early Christians had to wrestle with, which is a harsh reality to face, but it's that the Jewish people failed in many ways. And it's not that God failed, right? And Paul says that in Romans, right? Did the word of God fail? No. Right? It's just that humans are sinful. right? And so God was perfect through all of it, but like the Jewish people, they were constantly, as Jesus says, killing the prophets, right? I mean, God sent one person after another to check on the vineyard, yet they're constantly killing the people. And so I think that's why the feudal conduct inherited, right? Which implies that this was the inheritance of the people he's writing to, right? So the audience of 1 Peter, they were born into this. They were born into this mentality, but the Father lovingly saved them from it, right? He redeemed them. He purchased them. And the question becomes, well, how? Right? You have this throughout the whole Old Testament, people like it's a repetitive cycle, right? Every single time, it's an undulating cycle of, okay, people turn away from God and they rebel and they turn to the feudal conduct. And then something happens and they worship God for a few years and then it turns away back to the feudal conduct. And things are constantly changing. And this is what Peter's audience is born into. But he says, but you've been redeemed. And the question becomes, how? Right? What is it that finally redeemed us? Right? What sacrifice could be offered? What debt could be paid? Right? How many bulls did you have to sacrifice? How much gold did you have to give? And this is where he gives the contrast. Right? You were not redeemed with corruptible things like silver or gold, but with precious blood. Right? So it's
and if you weren't familiar with that language, then it would be kind of weird to not only contrast like precious metal with blood, but also imply that the precious blood is more precious than gold and silver.
Well, yeah, I mean, from a Gentile perspective, if you were to give me a bag of gold or a cup of blood, I'd take the bag of gold. Because, to me, that sounds a lot more valuable. But from a Jewish perspective, I mean, life is in the blood, right? And from a Jewish perspective, you know how valuable blood is, especially in God's eyes. So I think that would make sense.
Yeah. Anything else y'all want to add there? So, I'll backtrack a little bit. And if you address as Father, the one who impartially judges according to each one's work, conduct yourselves in fear during the time of your sojourn, knowing that you were not redeemed with corruptible things like silver or gold from your futile conduct inherited from your forefathers, but with precious blood, as of a lamb unblemished and spotless, the blood of Christ. So verse 19 there, why does he mention the lamb? Because he doesn't mention Christ until the very last word there. But what is Peter saying there?
They use the lamb for sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
The unblemished, spotless lamb for sacrifice. So he's pretty much saying that God's blood is better or like that of a lamb, that's spotless and unblemished.
Mm-hmm. And also, what's the imagery of a lamb?
Innocence?
Mm-hmm. Innocence.
Well, and specifically, once again, if you're considering from a Jewish perspective here, the language of redemption would bring to mind a specific moment in Jewish history, right? If you're thinking about the Jewish people, and you're thinking about God specifically, the Father, when is the moment where God made himself evidently the Father of the Jewish people? Well, it would be whenever he redeemed them from Egypt, right? It's whenever he literally, like he says, thus they shall know that I am Yahweh, and you are my people, right? Like Egypt and God's deliverance of them through Moses. That's the moment where God really declared himself the God of the Israelites, right?
Yeah.
And the way he did it was through the sacrificial blood of an unblemished lamb, right? And every single year, the Jewish people would offer sacrifice upon sacrifice, right? And every year on Passover, they would kill the lamb, they would eat the lamb, they would drink wine representing the blood. They would do this every single year to commemorate what had been gone in the past, right? But also, it was in anticipation of what God would do in the future, whenever one day he actually brought about a new covenant where he would actually fix everything. right? And so the idea is that they were redeemed from Egypt, but there was still further redemption needed, right? Because by the time you get to the end of the book of Exodus, God is dwelling in the Ark of the Covenant, in the middle of a tent, but he's not dwelling with the people, right? So it hasn't been solved yet, right? Further redemption is still needed, right? And by the time you get to the Old Testament, Ark of the Covenant's gone, Temple's gone, God's presence isn't there. And so there's definitely more redemption needed, right? And so if you're just thinking in terms of Old Testament theology, right, the language of redemption would bring to mind the Passover and how the Passover was a foreshadow of something greater that needed to come. And so if he's saying, well, the Father has redeemed you, then like using the language of a lamb unblemished and spotless would be very fitting. Because it'd be where their mind's already going, right? Because whenever they think of God redeeming them, they're already thinking of an unblemished lamb. And he's saying, well, this is not a corruptible lamb, right? This is not just an animal, right? This lamb is so much more than you could have ever anticipated.
Anything else you want to add there? He was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but appeared in these last times for the sake of you. I'll stop there. What is he saying there?
Is that first part talking about the fact that Jesus has always existed?
Could be.
Because he was foreknown before the foundation of the world.
Mm-hmm.
But we needed Jesus to incarnate for the sake of the cross.
I just asked that so we all because I don't know if there are people that would interpret that verse like in a weird way, but and there's definitely something that he is like establishing about Jesus there.
So at the same time, he existed before he was born, but he was born to benefit mankind.
Mm-hmm. Before Abraham was, I am. Yeah, again, we have the language again of like for the sake of you, kind of like with the prophets. It was that they were not serving themselves but you. But
Yeah, so the idea of being foreknown that's interesting language because obviously we would say that Jesus existed forever, but that's not exactly the point that Peter's making, right? His point is specifically more in regards to, I guess, the Father's knowledge of what Jesus would do, right? He was foreknown before the foundation of the world, right? So God knew about this. Like this was always God's plan.
Which before Genesis, before the fall.
Yeah, before the fall, before the original Exodus,
Right.
God knew what he was going to do. And all the unblemished lambs that you've sacrificed in the years since, they were not merely looking back at the Exodus, they were looking forward to the cross. Right? Just how nowadays, whenever we celebrate communion, we proclaim Christ's death till he comes. In many ways, whenever they celebrated the original communion, the Passover meal, they were proclaiming, Christ's foreshadowing until he actually showed up. Right? Like that's really kind of like what it seems like Peter's suggesting. Right? He was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but appeared in these last times for the sake of you. Right? You can go back, I think he's almost emphasizing what an exciting moment it is to be alive from their perspective. Right? I mean, their forefathers, they had to suffer through endless generations of futile conduct. Right? Because all they could do was look backward at these foreshadowings, right? Of these things that anticipated something future. And they had this future hope, but it wasn't as fully realized as the current Christians get to enjoy, right? But he says, guys, in these present times, in these last times, Jesus showed up, right? We have seen the actual unblemished lamb. The Passover lamb showed up, he died, and now you understand something to a much higher degree than your forefathers did, which could then tie back to why you need to conduct yourselves in fear, right? Because you have received so much more than they did, right? With great power comes great responsibility, right? Now that you have this knowledge, God's going to expect even more of you, right? Because you're no longer simply sitting around a meal eating lamb. You're breaking bread and drinking wine because you know the Lamb of God came and He's coming back, right? It's like the I'm trying to tie verse 20 back to all of this, to explain why He would feel the need to emphasize the foreknowledge and all that stuff.
And it ties back to what we talked about with the prophets, where, I mean, when you're looking forward to it, like whenever you're looking to like a future hope, and like how Peter kind of establishes that future hope is rooted in the past, like, or not so much rooted in the past, more so is that it was already predicted way in the past, and through those prophecies, that's like our what's the word I'm thinking of, like, not deposit, but it was like the ensurement that like we can trust God.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah, because I mean, He says He was foreknown before the foundation of the world, and you see that demonstrated throughout the scriptures, right? I mean, Genesis chapter 3, I'll put enmity between you and the woman, and your seed and her seed, right? Like, very beginning of the Bible, it's already predicting what Christ is going to do, right? And then we just talked about the prophets, searching and inquiring regarding the times and the kinds of times. Well, that's what the prophets are wrestling through, right? They see that there is this future unblemished lamb that's going to be sacrificed. I mean, Isaiah 53, right? Like a lamb before it shears is silent, so He did not open His mouth, right? And like a lamb, He was led to the slaughter, right? And so Isaiah sees this unblemished lamb in the future who is going to redeem humanity, but he doesn't know when it's going to be, right? But it's foreknown since the beginning of time, right? That's what Isaiah sees. He sees this was always the plan. He just doesn't know when. But Peter said, guys, y'all got to see it. It's here, right? Look before you. Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world.
Yeah, it's almost like one-upping. It's like first He says, this was foretold back in the prophets, but now He's saying, actually, even before the prophets, this was actually like, not foretold, but God He had already like foresaw this happening before the world was, like, before any of that was created.
Right. I never thought about this. In the Gospel of John, whenever Jesus says, blessed are those who have believed without seeing, in many ways, like, we always interpret that as Him talking about us. But in many ways, it also refers to the people of the past too. Right?
Yeah.
Like, it refers to, like Abraham. Believed without seeing.
Yeah,
right? Like what you see in Hebrews. Like the hall of faith. Right? None of these people saw. Right? Faith is the assurance of things hoped for. The conviction of things not seen. I don't know. I never thought about that verse in the Gospel of John like that until something you just said made me think of it. But it's like, they all based off of hearing, whereas Peter's telling his audience, like, one-upped. Like, y'all didn't just hear. Y'all saw. You don't see Him now, but He was here. Right? Like, I don't know. Like, something about what you said reminded me of that. Or made me think of it.
But, there's something else I was going to say.
Sorry, I'm going to cut you off there. I got excited.
Oh, no, you're good. It was something to do with the wording of, like, but appeared in these last times for the sake of you, and kind of in connection with, again, the previous verses about the prophets. But
was it just for the sake of you part? Like how the prophets had also said that it had been written for the sake of them?
How it said they were not serving themselves but you. I was trying to think what exactly, like, other than the fact that, like, obviously the gospel is, like, for the sake of them, but I can't remember what I was thinking of saying. But funny enough, whatever it was, the thought process led me to, like, the resurrection, and then I realized that the next verse mentions it.
One thing I think is cool, like, if you put some emotion behind these words, this would preach really well. Like, if you're the original audience, because it's like the idea of Him saying, like, guys, for eons and eons, people have been anticipating this very moment, right? The prophets longed for this day, right? Your forefathers They wasted away in futility because they did not have access to what you have right here, right now. But this generation is on the crux of the rest of the world, right? Everything shifts right here, right now, in this moment. Because the Christ has appeared. You have seen him. And you don't see him now, but you love him. Right? It's it preaches really well if you just put some emotion behind his words.
Right.
He was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but he appeared in these last times for the sake of you. Everybody's like, amen, amen, right? But the thing is, then he says, why are you saying amen? I'm talking about you. Conduct yourselves in fear. Live holy. Sober your minds up. Be ready to suffer. Right? That's kind of what he's doing. It's like he's emotionally building them up so that he can hammer down his come to Jesus moment. Right? That's where it's sometimes we could miss that if we just overanalyze it from just a theological perspective, because we can remove all the emotion from it. But if you're the original audience, this is exciting stuff, right? I mean, you are gaining access to something that your forefathers never had. They dreamed of it. You've received the secret, the secret antidote that solves all of your ancestors' problems, right? Every single, it's almost like if you came from a family that every single generation died of cancer, and then during your generation, they discovered a cure for cancer. That's almost what he's saying, right? He's like, guys, all of your forefathers lived in futility, and they offered sacrifice upon sacrifice, and they multiplied gold and silver trying to find something to redeem themselves, and they couldn't do it. But you have the sacrifice that's needed, right? That's kind of the implication if you're specifically looking at this from the perspective of the original audience. It's just exciting, right? It's because it's fresh, right? I mean, you have to realize when Peter's writing this, he's not writing 2,000 years after Jesus lived, right? He's writing 3 decades later, right? I mean, this is fresh stuff, right? I mean, that's just that's something that's kind of easy for us to forget unless we immerse ourselves into it and view it from the original audience's perspective. But I think that's kind of cool. It's exciting. It's you can just imagine them getting chills as it's being read aloud. We got a letter from Peter. Read it. And there's oh, wow. We're only 20 verses in.
Right. He was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but appeared in these last times for the sake of you, who through him are believers in God, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God. So what's he saying there?
Repeat the question, I'm sorry.
Just what's he saying there? So we talked about how he was calling us to live holy, and then he says if you're going to address as Father God, then conduct yourselves in fear, knowing that you were redeemed from the futile conduct inherited from your forefathers, not with gold and silver, corruptible things, but the blood of an unblemished lamb, the blood of Christ, who was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but appeared in these last times for your sake, for the sake of you, who through him are believers in God, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God. So just following the flow, but what is he ultimately saying? It's worded pretty straightforward, but still I want us to with everything else in mind. What is he saying?
I think it's talking about the fact that because Jesus resurrected from the grave, gave us eternal life, that we have this hope of the future glory of heaven. And we can be confident because of that.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, because of his precious blood, we are redeemed from our fertile conduct from our ancestors. Because we are redeemed from his blood, and we are believers in him, we give him glory. worship Him or talk about through our faith.
I also think it's talking about Jesus as mediator.
As mediator.
Mediator.
So, I would assume here, and maybe I'm wrong, but God here would be referring more so to God the Father, right? Specifically. I'm just trying to like.
I think this ties back to verse 17.
Yeah. So, God here would be referring more so to God the Father, right? Because he also mentions Christ. So, here he's saying that Jesus, or that Christ, he was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but he appeared in the last times for the sake of you who through him, Jesus, are believers in God the Father, who raised him, Jesus, from the dead and gave him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God the Father.
Yeah, so I think one thing he's emphasizing is that the nature of their relationship to God is not ancestry, it is belief. Right? So, like they might say Abraham is our father, but that doesn't matter here. Right? Through him are believers in God. Right? The reason why you have a relationship with God is because of what Jesus did. Right? It's your belief in what Jesus did that makes you a believer in the Father, and that is what makes you a son of God. Right? And ultimately, it's all, like, the whole point is that he's saying God's the one who set all of this in motion. Right? And so he did that out of love. Right? He doesn't have to say the word love here, but he's demonstrating what God did. Right? God did for them what they could not do for themselves. Right? All they could do is offer corruptible sacrifices. They could offer corruptible things to redeem themselves. They could not do anything. The Father sent his Son into the world. Right? And if you believe in him, you have eternal life. Right? I mean, it's literally John 3:16, just in much more complicated language. Right? And he's saying that, and this all is in the context, right? Verse 17 to 21, all of this is being stated to motivate you to conduct yourself in fear. Right? That's all, like, all of this is being said for that, right? Why do you conduct yourself in fear? Because he's a good father, right? Look at what he did for you, right? If he's going to ask you to suffer, it's not because he's like some weird sadistic jerk. No, look at what he's done for you. He did for you what you couldn't do, right? All you could do was offer corruptible sacrifices. He sent his Son, right? He opened up the path to a relationship. You received the feudal inheritance from your forefathers, where you thought, oh, as long as I offer these sacrifices, or as long as I'm a seed of Abraham, I'm good to go. That's hogwash, right? What you needed was the incorruptible sacrifice. And if you have that, then you can rightly call God your Father, right? Because through Jesus, you now have access to God, right? He is the way, right? The truth and the life, right? It's almost like Peter was best friends with John,
right?
It's almost like they were really good buddies, right? So through him, you're believers in God. And the cool thing is that not only did God send his Son and have his Son offer the sacrifice, but God didn't leave his Son dead, right? He raised him up from the dead and gave him glory so that your faith and hope are in God, right? So your faith is in God because of what Jesus did on the cross, and your hope is in God because of what Jesus did when he rose from the tomb, right? Your faith is in the sacrifice Jesus offered when God sent his Son to die, and your hope is in what Jesus accomplished when he rose from the dead, when the Father raised him, right? So like, if you just think about that, it seems like that's the logic of what he's arguing here, right? So Jesus suffered. You place your faith in that suffering, there's the sacrifice you needed to be redeemed. And then you place your hope in the resurrection because Jesus is the firstborn from the dead. If he was resurrected, and if he sits at the right hand of God, then we also will share in that resurrection, and we also will dwell in the presence of God forever. So just as Jesus suffered, and just as the prophets suffered, and that suffering gave way to glory, so too our suffering will give way to glory. Right? And so it seems like that's the logic there. And so he's saying, when I'm telling you to conduct yourself in fear, I'm not saying it's because God is some weird tyrant that you have to be terrified of and run away from. No, you need to fear him because he is an impartial judge. And therefore he's not going to take it easy on you. You need to draw near to him, and you need to do that because you realize he loves you and he's done all this stuff for you. Right? And because if you don't draw near to him, if you don't conduct yourself in fear, then you have no faith and hope in this life. Right? Faith and hope come from a fear of God. Because if you fear him, you'll see what he did for you. Okay.
Yeah.
That's it. I keep going on all the jokes. I'm telling you, this is dangerous. Like, having you lead this is giving me more time to just like sit back and reflect, and then like I just keep going on like these rants, but it'll be fine.
No, you're good.
That's good.
Yeah. Let's see, really quick.
Also, the idea of who raised him from the dead and gave him glory. In many ways, I think that he's highlighting that because that is also the faith that we will share, right? Like, because the reason why we fear suffering is because we fear death. But the cool thing is that the Father sent his Son into the world to suffer and die. But he raised him from the dead and gave him glory, right? Well, now, if we are calling God Father, then what is he calling us? Son. Okay, well, if we know what he did to his capital S Son, well, then why would we expect him to do any less with us? Right? Now, he sends us into the world to suffer and die. But he will raise us and give us glory. Right? Like it's literally the same idea. And Jesus says this, right? After Jesus resurrects, he goes to the apostles and says, as the Father sent me, so I sent you. Right? And so, if Jesus was sent into the world to lay his life down, we also are sent into the world to lay our life down. But the cool thing is that our lives will be raised back up and we will be with him. I was mainly talking just to give you some time to figure out what you want to say. But
Yeah, no, you're good. I was trying to see what the next verses were to make sure there wasn't anything else I was going to bring up, but we're good.
One thing I would like to add is I've noticed that whenever you have a leader, their followers will basically do what the leader is doing. If that makes sense.
Like they'll
That's what
imitate them.
David said.
Yeah.
we should.
We should. We don't always do it, but we should.
Yeah. That's true. Anything else y'all want to add there? Okay. So, he was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but appeared in these last times for the sake of you, who through him are believers in God, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God. Since you have in obedience to the truth purified your souls for a love of the brothers without hypocrisy, fervently love one another from the heart. For you have been born again, not of corruptible seed, but incorruptible, that is, through the living and enduring word of God. For all flesh is like grass, and all its glory like the flower of grass. The grass withers, and the flower falls off, but the word of the Lord endures forever. And this is the word which was proclaimed to you as good news.
That's
Anything there? Any comments?
Verse 25
Mm-hmm.
reminds me of Psalms 1. I think it's verse 3 or 4.
And
About-
Psalm 1?
Yes.
Yeah. Do y'all know what he's quoting from? Because we'll go to it eventually to see it, if or how it ties in. I mean, it's going to tie in, but because I want us to understand why he's quoting this and how it actually fits into what
Which
he's
psalm?
saying. What's that?
I was just asking Maverick, which psalm did you refer to?
Psalm 1.
Psalm 1? Oh, yeah.
When I think of seed, I think of Genesis. When I think of incorruptible seed and incorruptible seed.
Oh, yeah. And I think, because the word seed pops up throughout the Bible. In this instance, I don't think that like the seed refers to like the seed of David type deal. Like how like in Romans, I think he says like what does he say about the God about Jesus like being born to like the seed of David?
Oh.
It's like spermato or something like that. It's
Yeah.
like that kind of seed. The word, I think this is actually the only time that word even appears in the Bible.
I'll look it up.
But it's like spora something, like a spore. I think it's the word like spore.
Yeah.
And so this idea of like, spores, like mushrooms and plants, like they spread like spores out. But we'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to the seed part.
Yeah, spores. So one time it shows up. Huh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't say that because I guess people we use the word seed a couple different ways in the Bible.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Okay. So we'll go back and we'll go through verse by verse.
Yeah.
So, since you have in obedience to the truth purified your souls for a love of the brothers without hypocrisy, fervently love one another from the heart. We'll start there. So, what is he saying there? Because I don't know. To me, I think what he's saying is actually like the wording of it is kind of interesting. So this is another one of those. There's kind of a command, but it's also preceded by some sort of a, not condition, but it's saying like, since you have done this, do this. And so for the first part, what is he already kind of assuming they've done? Since you've done this.
Walk in obedience.
Well, yeah, so it's you have in obedience the truth, and then it's purified your souls.
Yeah, so basically he's clarifying that the thing that they've done is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, the thing that they've done is consistent with the Christian lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's in obedience to the truth.
You can think of verse 16, for I am holy, you should be holy. So kind of like
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. There's when you look at the whole verse, really the idea of loving one another is, it's really it's a very non-negotiable part of being a Christian. Like, and especially like, it's, so I don't know, I think it's interesting the way he words, like he specifically says that in obedience you purified your souls for a love of the brothers without hypocrisy. And what does he mean by that? What is love of the brothers without hypocrisy?
Be sincere. Like, don't love others just to get something out of it. Right? For yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, love your brothers and sisters in Christ and others who aren't of the flock because of the love that Jesus has for you. Is that making sense?
Mm-hmm. So what is hypocrisy?
hypocrisy is doing something, like telling somebody not to do it, and then you do it.
Pretty much, yeah.
Oh, so it's like hypocritical? Is that kind of
Yeah,
thing?
yeah.
Just
Like
say,
someone who shows hypocrisy is being hypocritical.
Yeah.
It's just the
Okay.
same word, different form.
yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And I mean, hypocrisy is something that Jesus specifically, but really, I mean, really God in general, he really attacks that a lot. But even within the letters so far, I mean, I don't know, I guess I shouldn't say that because that would be implying that he's assuming they have been hypocritical, which he's not assuming that. But
It sounds like he's just saying that they've done a good job of loving each other.
yeah.
But at the same time, it seems like he's going to highlight a way where they can do better. Right? So we have to figure out what's the difference between loving brothers without hypocrisy versus fervently loving one another from the heart. Because he says, you've been doing really good with loving brothers without hypocrisy. Now, you need to fervently love one another from the heart. Which I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
So, I guess he's saying that they're at least consistent. I looked up the word without hypocrisy. It's just one word. It means just sincere, right? It's so. It's a different word than we find other places for hypocrisy. It just means
yeah, that's right. I think some translations do say sincere love of the brothers.
Yeah, it's unfeigned, undisguised, sincere. But it is where we get the word. It's literally just the word hypocrisy with the negative particle in front of it. So it is literally without hypocrisy.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So.
Keep your word.
So we are called to love brothers without hypocrisy, right? So they are obeying the truth, right? Which he might even have in mind Jesus' words, right? Because that implies, like, if they are doing this in obedience, that implies that they've been commanded to do it. And if you go back to the Gospel of John, Jesus says, love one another as I have loved you, love one another, right? And he's specifically talking about the brothers, right? They will know you're my disciples by your love for one another. Right? So in obedience to the truth, you've purified your souls for love, right? So there's like the idea that they had to, you can't just do it. You have to purify yourself in order to be able to do it, right? And apparently they've done it, right? Like, so apparently he's commending them. He's saying, you've done a good job, right? Great job in that regard. The way that you have cared for one another is not hypocritical, right? And I think it's hard to, like, speak more specifically into what he has in mind.
Yeah.
Because, like, he might have specific stuff in mind because he knows the audience better. I mean, I guess we could just start listing out examples if we wanted to, but that could go on forever.
Yeah. And it's, like, to me, I always like looking at, like, the ways things are specifically worded. Like, for example, like, if you add verse 23, like, it seems to imply, like, that there is, like, verse 23 is part of the reason why he's saying verse 22. Like, he's saying fervently one another from the heart, like, for you have been born again, not of corruptible seed, but incorruptible. So I just think it's interesting that he, like, words it that way, I guess I should say.
Well, yeah, the whole thing is very interestingly worded because you also have to figure out how it ties back to what he was saying before.
Right, because I'm like, if you just read through it, you get what he's generally saying. Like, well, yeah, love each other, like, sincerely, and then we've been born again, not of we've been born of incorruptible seed, but, like, he's not just saying those as standalone things.
Yeah.
Like, there seems to be a flow.
Yeah, it's easy to understand each clause in isolation, but it's harder to figure out how they all tie to one another and how all of those verses tie to the broader text, I guess you could say. There could be an aspect here because I think what he's saying is, like, because there's a contrast, like I said, right? So they're doing good at loving one another, like, without hypocrisy, which is good. But he advances it and says they need to fervently love one another from the heart. And he might not necessarily be saying they're not doing it, but he's saying they need to hear that, right? Which at the very least probably means that the first thing he was complimenting them on was purely an external assessment, right? Like, he's saying, as I see it, you're doing a very good job of unhypocritically loving one another. Now, what you need to make sure you're doing is fervently doing that from the heart, right? Which could tie back to stuff we were talking about previously, where it can't just be external check boxes, right? It's got to be a heart devotion, right? Just like it can't be with God either, right? We can't just devote ourselves externally to God. It has to be heart, right? Faith, hope, love.
Yeah, I mean, and ultimately those things have to be, because, I mean, really, even if you tried to, you really can't, like, there really is no way to externalize the Christian faith anyways, because the things that he asks of you require you to they kind of require you to have it, for it to be from the heart anyways. Like, I'm not sure how one would embrace suffering and trials through merely external action, because that's an internal thing anyways.
Yeah. Well, and ultimately, I think that's what he's trying to get them back to as well, because I think really what all this, because he's going to get back to talking about suffering very quickly, right? And all of this is in the context of suffering. And I think that what he's probably arguing is that in order to, especially for his original audience, in order to fervently love one another from the heart, you need to be willing to suffer. Because you've got to realize that your unwillingness to suffer is going to share a bad testimony for the people around you, right? Like, because we work as a body, right? We are not in isolation, right? If I am not willing to suffer, well, that means that I'm probably going to lead some of y'all to not be willing to suffer either, right? And so if you are wanting to, like, you're doing a good job of, like, it's kind of like the idea of, everybody in our churches nowadays will agree that we all need to love one another better, right? Everybody agrees on that. Not everybody would agree that we need to be prepared to suffer, right? Some people, they do not like that theology, right? And so I think what he's getting at here is like, well, yeah, y'all are doing a good job of loving one another in, like, the everyday things. but you need to examine yourself. Like the word fervently, right? It means earnestly, right? Like you gotta it's not simply, let me be kind to this person. Fervently implies you're looking for opportunities to love them, right? You're not simply waiting for them to roll around. You are seeking out ways to love people better. Not simply in your actions, but in your heart. One way you can do that, and he doesn't explicitly say it here, but if you're looking at the broader context, is I think it's through a willingness to suffer. Because in making sure that your faith is genuine and your hope is secure, you're not simply serving yourself. You're serving the family of God. Right? And that's something that we have to realize. The reason why we need to count it joy when we suffer is not simply so that our faith can be secure, right? It's not so we can feel good about ourselves. Oh, look at me. I'm such a good Christian. I'm willing to die for my faith. He says, no. The reason why you need to make sure that you're ready to suffer is also for the people around you. Because you don't want to be the reason why they also stumble. Right? And so I think that could be, once again, he doesn't explicitly state that here, but if you look at what he says earlier and what he's going to say later, he keeps going back to the idea of suffering.
Yeah.
And so if he's saying fervently love them, I think he's saying that sobering your mind up and learning to conduct yourself in fear is part of loving one another. Right? That's a big aspect of it. We don't usually think of it that way, though. We usually make it more of an individual thing. Oh, it's my relationship with God.
Right.
No. It's our relationship with God. Right? Your relationship individually is important to the body as a whole. Because if there's one, if you hurt your toe, the rest of your body's going to suffer from it. Right? And so the idea is we all need to be unified in that love. Right? And if one person's faith or hope is lacking, it's going to affect the rest. Right? So I think that's probably what he's getting at here, which could explain why he's more vague. Right? Whereas when Paul says love one another, he's usually and here's 5 ways you can do it. I think Peter's pretty vague here because there's really a number of ways you can apply it. He's specifically just saying you need to be mindful of these things. And then he leans into verse 23 where he starts talking about the corruptible seed, the incorruptible seed. Right? The ways that you love one another is specifically in some way related to having eternity in mind.
Yes.
Right? And specifically that we have an incorruptible inheritance. So.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to add to that. I was just going to basically reiterate what you said. I mean, it's one thing to just simply care deeply about your brethren, but it's another thing to actually put your life on the line and to give up things for them. But yeah, so since you have in obedience to the truth purified your souls for a love of the brothers without hypocrisy, fervently love one another from the heart. For you have been born again, not of corruptible seed, but incorruptible. That is, through the living and enduring Word of God. We'll stop there. What does he mean there?
That last phrase, through the living and enduring Word of God.
Well, I guess really the whole thing. I mean, because he's also talking about being born again, and then there's the seed, corruptible versus incorruptible. And I mean, he specifies, so the incorruptible is the living and enduring Word of God. So you don't have to really wonder what that is, but what is he actually saying?
Incorruptible, like non-sinful, not tempted.
Broken.
Though I guess the imagery, at least, and again, I guess really the second half of the verse kind of defines that for you, but to me, the imagery of corruptible versus incorruptible is more so about time frame, the same way that he talks about gold and silver that are corruptible, they decay. I think the imagery here is more about temporal versus eternal. And like I said, he kind of clarifies through the living and enduring Word of God.
What do you think he means by Word of God there? Because this could mean Scripture, it could mean Jesus, it could mean
right.
the words of the prophets themselves, it could mean all of them.
Could be all of the above, yeah.
Yeah, because you could do corruptible seed could be, seed of Abraham, and then incorruptible seed, the Word of God, could be Jesus, the living and enduring King, right, born of Him. Or You could say, okay, you weren't born again, so because the prophet said it, you're born again into incorruptible because of the believing in what was fulfilled when the prophet's words came true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a couple different ways you could go with that. I have a couple different things I can pull up, but
I think he's probably referring more to scripture just because of what he says in the quote he says.
Yeah, I think that and the thing that follows, like ultimately, I think a lot of it is just the gospel.
Yeah.
I think that's mainly what he's referring to.
Yeah.
And that's why he says it's been proclaimed as good news.
Yeah.
But so I guess really, I can pull it up, but do y'all know who he's quoting here? He's quoting from the book of Isaiah.
I got it pulled up if you want me to.
Oh, you do already?
Yeah.
Okay.
Isaiah chapter 40. You want me to get the context or just read it?
I'd say get the context probably.
Okay. So Isaiah 40. This is actually pretty cool because it ties into what we've been talking about a little bit.
Yeah.
So the book of Isaiah is 66 chapters long, and most people would agree that chapters 1 through 39 is one section, chapters 40 through 66 is another section. Right? Through Isaiah chapters 1 through 39, the looming threat is the Assyrians who are coming in, and God says, if you repent, I will send the Assyrians away. Right? And King Hezekiah repents, and the Assyrians leave. But then at the very end, in chapter 39, Hezekiah makes a really big mistake. And he lets his pride get the best of him. He boasts a little bit before the Babylonians. And God says, all right, well now the Babylonians are going to come get you. They are going to destroy you. They are going to take you into captivity. And you are going to be exiled and sojourned and scattered because of what you've done. Right? And so Isaiah chapter 39 ends in like a really negative note. And chapters 40 through 66 begin in a very, God wanting to comfort the people who are going to be going off into exile. Right? He's basically so chapters 40 through 66 are actually much more positive than the rest of Isaiah. Even there's still judgment stuff in there. But by and large, God is trying to comfort the people and remind them that he still has plans for them, even though he's going to discipline them for a little bit. Right? Which ties in. Right? And you'll recognize the first words of Isaiah 40 because John the Baptist quotes them whenever he shows up on the scene. Right? So I'm just going to start with verse 1.
Yeah.
But he's quoting verses 6 through 8.
Yeah.
So, comfort, O comfort my people, says your God. Speak kindly to Jerusalem and call out to her that her warfare is ended, that her iniquity has been removed, that she has received of Yahweh's hand double for all her sins. A voice is calling. Clear the way for Yahweh in the wilderness. Make smooth in the desert a highway for our God. Let every valley be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low. And let rough ground become a plain, and the rugged terrain a broad valley. Then the glory of Yahweh will be revealed, and all flesh will see it together, for the mouth of Yahweh has spoken. A voice says, call out. Then he answered, what shall I call out? This is where he quotes. All flesh is grass, and all its loveliness is like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades, when the breath of Yahweh blows upon it. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God stands forever. So, that is that.
Yeah. What am I gonna say? Sorry, I blanked out. So with Isaiah 40, he says all people are grass, right? And so there's obviously a contrast here. So he says that the glory there's kind of a contrast between like the word of the Lord versus like the glory of grass, which is people. So I'd say really it's like the glory of people, like the glory of people versus like the glory of God. But what ultimately is like what is it saying here?
That one day, just like flowers and grass fade away, man will, because we as flesh will eventually die off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, even in the context of Isaiah, he might even be thinking specifically of like rulers and authorities, but
Yeah, because in Isaiah, the whole thing is, this voice crying in the wilderness, prepare the way for God, right? And he's telling everybody to get their hearts ready, because in the future, God is going to do something, right? And the idea is that the people are in the wilderness, right? So he's comforting the exiles, the sojourners, right? They are currently suffering, but God is going to do something in the future that they need to get ready for, right? Which ties in exactly what Peter is saying here, right? The idea is that present suffering, future hope. And the way that you prepare for that future hope to arrive is by sobering your mind up and getting ready. And so this voice crying in the wilderness says, all right, all the valleys are going to be lifted up, all the mountains are going to be laid low. Right? The idea is that the humble will be exalted, the proud will be humbled. Right? So everything's going to come back down like this. Right? Men go about thinking that they are like everything in the world. They're nothing more than grass. Right? All flesh is grass. Right? You might think you're something, but you're not. Right? Go look at the grass. Right? The sun shines a little too brightly. You know what grass does? Withers away. You'll go look at those flowers and say, wow, those flowers are so pretty. And those flowers are going to fade. Right? They're going to be gone. Same thing with man. Right? Where's Nebuchadnezzar today? Dust. Right? Where's, I don't know, Hammurabi? Right? Where are all these great men? Where's Nimrod? Right? Where's King David? Right? All these men, they faded away. They were great men, but they faded away. Right? And so the whole context is saying that you need to sober yourself up and realize that we are, we also will fade. Right? And so the thing that he's reassuring the sojourners is, guys, this life is not all there is. Right? If you're living for this life only, I hate to break it to you, but even if you were freed from Babylon, and even if you went back home, that's not going to be a solution for you. Because you're going to go back home, and you're still going to die. Right? You can either die in the streets of Babylon, or you can die in the streets of Jerusalem. Either way, you're going to die. Right? What you need to do is you need to get your heart right with your Creator. Right? Because the Lord is coming, so make straight the highway. Right? And so, it ties in exactly what Peter's saying. Right? It's like, all right, present suffering, future hope, and the way that you live in light of that future hope is realizing that life is fleeting. Right? And if you do not realize that we are destined for corruption, you're not going to be able to actually sober yourself up before God. But then what Peter says is really cool, right? Because you go back to verse 23, you have been born again, not of corruptible seed, but incorruptible. So there is something that does last. And that's what what the voice of the wilderness points out. Right? There is something that lasts longer than man. Right? Yeah, flesh fades away, grass fades away, flowers fade away. But you know what doesn't? The Word of God. The prophets knew that. That's why they wrote, even though they knew that their present generation was going to fade away like the grass. They knew that the Word would persist and the Word would endure longer, so that people would hear the Word and be born again to an incorruptible seed. Right? So in the Word of God is the key to eternity. Right? If you want to not fade away like the grass or like the flower, the answer's in the Word of God. And I think ultimately that's what he's getting at. And interestingly enough, since he's going to tie this all into good news and stuff, it's very fitting that he quotes the same passage that John the Baptist quotes. Because if you think about it, a lot of this language he's been using has been calling back to the exile, right? And the people going off in exile. Well, the way that the Old Testament ends is promising that Elijah the prophet's going to show up, making everybody go back to God, right? And then the Messiah is going to show up. Well, John the Baptist shows up, and what passage does he quote? This one, right? A voice crying in the wilderness, right? And he's saying, guys, make straight the path for God. There is a future king coming. And he's literally telling the people to get their heads straight, sober their minds up, to get ready for the incorruptible seed to show up, right? But the incorruptible seed, in Peter's context, is actually the word itself that's being proclaimed, right? And so, if you think about it, That's what I love. Whenever you actually look at the context of the passages being cited, it makes it even better because you're like, oh, like that is perfect. Like Peter 100% knew what he was doing here, right? He's talking about sojourners, who are exiles in Babylon, right? Who are suffering in the present, anticipating future hope. That already works, but then Peter is using this as a means to show that present hope has shown up. Well, who else to allude to than John the Baptist, the one who literally told everybody that Jesus was about to show up, right? Like it's just so cool especially because Peter literally just mentioned that Jesus was the unblemished Lamb, right? Well, how did John the Baptist identify Jesus? Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, right? And so, like all of this, it just ties in perfectly. Like if you know your Old Testament, if you know your Gospels, like all of it's just like, it's like this is just fantastic literature, right? If it wasn't the Word of God, it would already be amazing. And then it is the Word of God, which is, enduring forever. That's cool.
Yeah, it makes it even better. It also kind of reminds me of James a little bit. Like, I don't know if I would say it's like a 1-to-1, but as far as the seed part goes. So in James 1, he says, therefore, laying aside all filthiness and all that remains of wickedness, and gentleness, receive the implanted word which is able to save your souls. But become doers of the word, and not merely hearers who delude themselves. And then he goes on to say, like, the whole, like, the one who hears but doesn't do is like the man who looks at himself in the mirror. And then he later on goes and talks about like the religious hypocrisy, who thinks himself to be religious while not bridling his tongue, but deceiving his own heart. This man's religion is worthless. But just the idea that like the gospel is the gospel really is like a seed, like. And then in John 12, you have Jesus talking about how there is how a seed must die to produce much fruit.
Yeah.
So it's like the idea of like he dies, and then there's like this implanted word, like through being born again and like being baptized into Jesus. There is like a seed that is planted within us,
Mm-hmm.
Spiritually. And then again in James, it talks about like I guess you could say the seed of faith that becomes perseverance when you endure suffering, and that produces like endurance, and that makes you perfect and complete. Whereas the opposite of that was the whole like the sin that leads to death.
Yeah.
But again here, it's kind of the same concept. Like he's asking them to like receive an implanted word, and that leads to loving one another and actually like not being hypocritical, which they're doing. But
Yeah. Yeah, so it like he's basically pointing out like just to live consistently with what they've received, right? Like that's what it is. Like you've been born again, right? Like there's no question about that. His audience has been born again. They've received Christ, right? And they've been born again of the incorruptible seed, right? The Word of God, and so the natural result would be to love from the heart, right? Which that's even like New Covenant language in a way. Right, because the forefathers received the old covenant, right, where the law was written on tablets of stone, but they received the new covenant, which is the law written on their heart, right, and they've been given new hearts, not hearts of stone, but hearts of flesh, right, and so, I don't know, like that language kind of ties to that as well, I think.
I'm wondering, just reading it again, like it doesn't change anything, but. Like, I guess the way I'm reading it now is that Peter is essentially saying, like, because he's not technically saying, since you have an obedience, love the brothers with a hypocrisy. He's talking about, like, purifying your souls for the love. And then saying, for you have been born again. I'm wondering if the born again is, like, related to the purifying your souls. Like, basically saying, like, now that you prepared yourselves to do that, like, go all out kind of thing. I don't know if that makes sense.
So you're saying that the being born again is the thing that purified their souls?
I think.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, like you've met the prerequisites, right? Like it could be that he's saying it's not possible to fervently love one another from the heart until you've been born again, because until you've been born again, you haven't purified your soul. The good news is that you have been born again and you have purified your soul, so now you can fervently love one another from your heart.
mm-hmm.
And that could even explain the contrast there, because even a non-Christian can love people without hypocrisy to an extent, right? Right? Like they can be genuine in their love and they can be very sincere, right? Like that is possible, but like a non-Christian would have a very tough. Like it'd be hard to even have a motive to earnestly love people from the heart, right? To actively seek out ways to sacrificially love somebody from the heart. That's a very different type of love, right? And so it could be just saying that, yeah.
Like if you tied in with the previous verses, he just talked about how Jesus has like died and he's paid the price for us to have been born again, and it's almost like the idea of like, but now that you know the cost and like now that you're see the race set before you, it's like go as hard as you can.
Yeah. Now that you've been born to an incorruptible seed, you can begin to live according to an incorruptible love.
Kind of like
yeah.
So I hope that makes sense what I'm saying. But.
Yeah. Yeah. So like it's saying that there's so much more now,
mm-hmm.
right? Because we know that flesh is not all there is, because that's what the scriptures told us. Right? I mean, that's the message in Isaiah 40, right? Isaiah, like the voice of the wilderness is telling them, guys, your hope cannot simply be to come back to the land, right? Because all flesh is like grass, right? The proud, the humble, like they're all going to meet the same fate, right? Like he doesn't say simply that the valleys are going to turn into mountains and the mountains into valleys. He says no, they're going to be like leveled, right? God is impartial, right? He's going to put all people on the same level. All people are going to face him. We are simply making the way for God, right? Like that's what the voice is crying out. And so in Isaiah's original context, he's telling them, you can't simply have hope in this life. Yes. And especially because, I mean, Isaiah, he's writing to people generations before the captivity even happens, right? So, like, these words are comfort for people generations to come, which ties into what Peter said earlier. Mm-hmm. But these would not have been words of comfort to the present generation, because if he's having to comfort future generations, that means that hardship is coming soon, right? And so the current generation Isaiah is writing to is that, yes, you're going to suffer in the present, and then future hope is coming. And then, for the people who are suffering in the present, he's going to say, yeah, future hope is coming, right? And all of the whole message is saying, there's got to be more than simply this life, right? And the key to that is by hearing the word of God and trusting in that future hope. Okay, well, if you're making straight the pathway for God, why are you doing that? Well, apparently God's going to show up. And God's going to do something that provides the answer to the problem, right? If there's more to life than simply life alone, well, whenever God comes along that highway, he's going to make that clear, which is what John the Baptist declared, right? So John, he says, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, right? Jesus shows up, takes away the sins of the world. Well, now we have access to eternity, right? I don't know if I explained that logic well, but the idea is that Isaiah is predicting there's got to be more than just this life. But he doesn't exactly say what it is. He just simply says that God is coming. And so the implication is that when God shows up, he's going to provide the answer to what that is. When John the Baptist, the voice crying in the wilderness, declares that God is about to show up, he kind of explains what that thing is. Right? Jesus here to take away the sins of the world. Right? And he's telling people to be baptized for forgiveness of sins. Right? And so it's about that redemption. And that is the key to, the incorruptible seed. I'm basically just highlighting how the Word of God paves the way for the eternal life, right? That ultimately Peter's pointing them towards, and how that ties into loving one another and all that stuff.
And there's also the idea, I know in James at least, he talks about, I think at the very end of the book, he talks about like brothers like straying away. and talks about how like love covers like a.
Multitude of sins.
I think it's love covers a multitude of sins, and I think Peter says the same later on in this letter too. They're worded a bit differently because I want to say that James mentions death in there somewhere, but I don't know if that's what he'd be thinking of. But I mean, when you think about, just zoom out for a second, you have a group of Jewish exiles, and again, if you think of it individually, then we're thinking like, okay, well, we have to, persevere so that we don't stray. But when you think about the community, part of loving one another fervently from the heart is keeping unity.
Yeah.
And the idea of if there are other people who are also like, and I think he also mentions later on, like knowing that other people are also suffering the same things like elsewhere.
Yeah.
The idea is part of that love is actually keeping people like keeping people from straying away, like keeping the pack tight. And to me, again, that goes back to the whole like corruptible, but not corruptible, but incorruptible, because with like time is short, and like knowing that we have more than just this life, you don't want other people to stray away and like not receive that inheritance.
Yeah.
So like for their sake.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot to be said for loving people enough that you care about their like eternity. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense.
but that could be another part of it. Just because sometimes we discount the communal. I mean, we talked about it already earlier, but anything else y'all want to add there?
Are we just doing for all these verses?
Well, I guess we didn't really talk about the last line.
Okay.
But
Because that's the one thing I have anything else to say about.
okay. Well, we'll go ahead and so. All flesh is like grass, and all its glory like the flower of grass. The grass withers, and the flower falls off, but the word of the Lord endures forever. And this is the word which is proclaimed to you as good news. What are you gonna say?
Yeah. Okay, so I just think this is kind of cool. So good news, I mean, like, it says proclaimed to you as good news. In Greek, that's like one word. It's just, this is the word that was evangelized to you, right? Because evangelism comes from the same word where gospel comes from, right? So this is the word which was proclaimed to you as gospel, right? And this is where I get to kind of nerd out a little bit. Because the question becomes, when was this gospel proclaimed to Peter's audience, right? And really, I mean, ultimately, we don't know the answer to that, right? Because ultimately, we just know these people identify as Christians, therefore, they obviously had to place their faith in the gospel, which means that they had to believe in the gospel, and they had to hear it to begin with, right? Which ties into what Paul says in Romans, right? Faith comes through hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ, right? Which ties in very much to this, right? But, if you're like, so you gotta okay, where did they hear this, right? And we don't know. Ultimately, Peter knows that they did hear it at some place. But ultimately, we know when the gospel began to get proclaimed, right? And that would be when John the Baptist showed up, right? John the Baptist is the first one who's really proclaiming what we would call the gospel of Jesus, right? And I'm not saying that's what Peter has in mind here, but what I do think is cool is the Gospel of Mark traditionally is known as the memoirs of Peter, right? So Peter is ultimately the source behind what Mark wrote down. And the cool part about this is that the Gospel of Mark wastes no time getting to the actual action of the thing, like the actual story. And according to Peter, through Mark, there is a beginning to the gospel, right? Mark chapter 1, verse 1. The beginning of the gospel, Jesus Christ, the Son of God. As it is written in Isaiah the prophet, behold, I send my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, make ready the way of the Lord, make his path straight. John the Baptist appeared in the wilderness, preaching a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. Obviously, that's cool because the Gospel of Mark, which traditionally is the memoirs of Peter, literally begins by quoting this same passage.
And a few verses before.
Yeah, it's literally just a few verses earlier. It's Isaiah 40, right? And so it literally says, this is the beginning of the gospel. And Peter here says, this was proclaimed to you as good news. This could be like a little subtle hint, like, this was proclaimed to you as gospel. Where? Gospel of Mark, right? Like, and even if the Gospel of Mark wasn't written at this point, it implies that this was Peter's custom. Where does Peter begin his gospel? Isaiah 40, right? And in general, since his audience, like if Peter is writing to these people, that means that these people know who Peter is, which means that they have heard Peter preach. And if it was Peter's custom to begin preaching the gospel, starting with John the Baptist and quoting Isaiah chapter 40, well then exactly, right? And this is the word which was proclaimed to you as good news, right? And if you want to read more, go read the Gospel of Mark, right? Like, I just think that's so cool, like the connection there, right? This book is written by Peter. The Gospel of Mark, inspired by Peter's teachings. The Gospel of Mark begins quoting Isaiah chapter 40 and then talking about John the Baptist. Right here, he mentions Isaiah 40 and says, this was proclaimed to you as gospel, right? It's like, I don't know, I just think that's cool. And then literally the fact that Mark says, the beginning of the gospel, right? Like, Mark says, this is where you start, right? If you're going to proclaim the gospel, you've got to start with Isaiah 40. And then Peter's saying the same thing here. It's like, this is like a good example of like an undesigned coincidence,
Yeah.
right? Like the place where it's just like, all just like, it's like a puzzle piece clicking together. That's all I have to say there. I know it's getting late, so I'll stop talking. That was my last thing to say, and I'm going to hold myself to that. So.
No, you're good. I mean, I think that was good.
Good stuff, man.
Anything else y'all want to add there? I mean, we talked about it throughout, but is there any like other thoughts or maybe like takeaways, application points that anyone wants to share? There's definitely a lot we could say, and we already have said. Good. All right. Well, that's all chapter 1.